Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my Week 8 waiver wire targets for the 2019 fantasy football season. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about waiver wire targets for the running back, quarterback, wide receiver, tight end, and defensive positions going into Week 8. As we all know, Week 7 was quite the fiesta. There was a lot of players that had fantastic performances and a lot of players that we depend upon that had awful just weeks in general. But overall, we're going to be talking about a couple essential players that are available on your waiver wires that hopefully you can add to your rosters to help you progress towards capturing a 2019 fantasy championship. There are some big names on this list that are going to be big contributors in the coming weeks, so hopefully they are available for you. Before we get into that, let me remind all of you, if you haven't yet already, click that subscribe button, join the community, and also, click that bell notification button to stay up to date on my latest content. Don't forget to click the like button on today's video. I really do appreciate everyone's support, so thank you again. All right, everybody. Hey, how's it going? Hope everyone's doing well. So we're talking about some waiver wire targets, but before we get into that, I had a couple pieces of news that I wanted to go ahead and talk about in terms of player injuries that took place this past weekend. So a couple of the biggest pieces of news, obviously number one has to do with David Johnson and the fact that he was active yet didn't play more than one snap. I think he had 2 yards total. And Chase Edmonds, as we all are aware, had 27 rushes, over 100 yards, 3 touchdowns, and had himself an incredible performance. He was the number one running back on the week. So David Johnson's injury and his health going forward, that's going to be the biggest question. Now, what I've heard thus far is that Spencer Ware, formerly of the Kansas City Chiefs, and Ajayi, formerly of the Philadelphia Eagles, they will be working out for the Arizona Cardinals this week in order to perhaps pick up another running back. Now, that is because the third string running back on the team did sustain an injury, and the only 2 active running backs this past week in Week 7 for the Arizona Cardinals against the Giants were Edmonds and David Johnson. Edmonds had to carry the entire workload in order to make sure that David Johnson going into the future of the season was healthy. So it was more of a precautionary measure to not play him, but unfortunately for us in the fantasy football community, not knowing that David Johnson was going to completely be, written out of the entire game script is unfortunate. And I know many of you probably lost your weeks, and I know many of you left Chase Edmonds on the bench because who would have thought that Chase Edmonds was going to have all of the work in the running game, and it's incredible. So at least we know that the active logo doesn't really mean anything anymore. This kind of sets a precedent for at least David Johnson going into the future. But hopefully, if he continues to practice and he can get back on track, then we can start to believe what they're saying about his injury having to do with a back injury, him trying to fight through that. So we'll see. Other pieces of information in terms of injury: Adam Thielen, hamstring injury, will likely miss Thursday night's game against the Washington Redskins. So we will be talking about a replacement for him on the Vikings offense. Obviously, that Vikings offense has been absolutely incredible thus far this season. They will be playing in Minnesota, so they'll have the home field advantage, and on top of it, they won't have to be in a rain game in which the wide receivers of said team are going to be completely gone. If you guys watched that 49ers versus Washington game this past weekend, goodness gracious, that was an incredible just showing of, the weather really impacted the game. Nobody scored a touchdown. Robbie Gould had 9 points and pretty much carried this team to the victory. But either way, we'll talk about some replacements for Adam Thielen because the hamstring injury, even though it's not significant, it will hold him out for a little bit of time. And then on top of that, Will Fuller, speaking of hamstring injuries, he did sustain one during yesterday's game. According to what I have heard, it is quite significant. Therefore, he is going to miss time. We've always talked about if Will Fuller can stay healthy, he can be an incredible wide receiver for this Houston Texans offense. Now, finally, for the 3rd season in a row, he is going to deal with injuries. And we know from the past, Will Fuller does not come back quickly, and considering the severity of this one, it's only going to increase the value of the other wide receivers. We saw DeAndre Hopkins find his relevancy back again, even though he had one of his touchdowns called back yesterday. I think going forward, DeAndre Hopkins should see more work, similar to how he was last season. And then it also helps the other receiving core members of Keke, Coutee, and Kenny Stills going forward in that Texans offense. So all in all, couple of essential players going down with injuries that are going to miss time potentially. So we want to go ahead and we want to pick up relevant, workhorse guys that are going to be the handcuffs, and they're going to absorb the value in those situations. So we'll do that. Now, before we begin, is there anything else? I got to really quickly, I wrote everything down. Just gotta hash it out real quick. Let's see here. Adam Thielen, MRI, blah, blah. All right. Okay. Oh, also, Kareem Hunt was cleared today. We're going to talk about him in a little bit. Kareem Hunt was cleared today to return to practice. He is eligible to play in Week 10 against the Buffalo Bills. So that's why we're going to talk about him in a little bit. I know it's only Week 8, but for those of you who are anticipating his return, we'll talk about him as a potential pickup. All right, now let's get into it, shall we? Let's talk about my Week 8 running back targets for the 2019 fantasy football season. Obviously, number one, needless to say, it is Chase Edmonds. Now, for those of you who are David Johnson owners or watched episodes from a couple weeks back, we talked about Chase Edmonds to an extent because of the fact that a couple weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, if I'm not mistaken, David Johnson missed multiple practices in a single week. We always, want to have handcuffs. Therefore, we told everybody we got to go pick up Chase Edmonds, have him on roster. Now, if somehow Chase Edmonds is not on roster in your league, then this is an absolute pickup. I mean, from the way it looks, the fact that they're working out another running back, the fact that David Johnson did not play more than one snap this past week, the fact that Chase Edmonds had such an incredible game. This is a guy that is in an offense that, as of right now, has some relevant work coming in its direction. Even though, yes, they have to play against the New Orleans Saints this week, I still do think that Chase Edmonds and the value that he currently has in this offense being, the running back. I mean, outside of Chase Edmonds running the ball, what did this offense do? Kyler Murray did nothing. Larry Fitz couldn't do anything. They still have Christian Kirk sitting on the injured mark, not playing in these games. So a lot of it had to just do about the run. I mean, it was just all the running game. So going forward, if in fact this offense continues to feed the ball to Chase Edmonds to an extremely high amount of times, what did he have? 27 carries. We're going to see some value out of him. So hopefully he's available. If so, go ahead and pick him up. I'll have him on roster because he's going to have value, especially if David Johnson's not participating in the coming weeks. All right, moving on to number 2, Latavius Murray. Speaking of another running back who is filling in for a starter, at least we knew Latavius Murray was going to be the starter this week because of the fact that Alvin Kamara was determined to be out, or I think, early Saturday? So that was already determined. They gave us a head start, and they gave a lot of us an opportunity to go over to the waiver wire and pick up Latavius Murray and fill in for that spot. Now, did I anticipate Latavius Murray having a 27-carry game for over 100 yards and 2 touchdowns? Absolutely not. But what this kind of leads me to believe is that, yes, Latavius Murray, we already know he's a good running back, but this Saints offense is absolutely incredible. I don't understand why they don't feed Alvin Kamara this way, but if they did, he would be the number 1 running back in the National Football League in terms of fantasy football, without a doubt in my mind. It's not even close. So just kind of getting a little bit of that taste of what this offense is capable of, especially in the running game, if they want to fully commit to a running back, this is helpful. Now, we know that Alvin Kamara is dealing with an injury. This is a guy that if, in fact, Alvin Kamara is to sit out again this coming week against the Cardinals, which I don't think they need him to play against the Cardinals, Latavius Murray, another guy that's going to have huge value. I'm assuming he's already owned in your league, not only because he does get work out of that backfield and that he's already a handcuff to Alvin Kamara, but also that we already knew Alvin Kamara was going to be out. So, Latavius Murray was probably picked up by a majority of people in your league, perhaps yourself. So I'm assuming he's gone, but I just wanted to go ahead and mention him because I think he does have immense value going forward if, in fact, Alvin Kamara is going to miss any more time going forward. Moving on to number 3, Jamaal Williams of the Green Bay Packers, a guy that even Monday night, we all talked about it. He had a fantastic performance, even though I anticipated that Monday night game against the Lions, a lot of his value do go to Aaron Jones. We saw, some resurgence of this backfield. Aaron Jones caught himself a touchdown, kind of reestablished himself this past Sunday against the Raiders. And Jamaal Williams did the same. Had himself a receiving touchdown, had himself some good amount of work, even though he didn't get as many touches on the ground that I would have liked to have seen. This offense was just high-powered, passing the ball. Everyone was getting involved in this offense, even with Devontae Adams out. Aaron Rodgers was feeding everyone around him, making everyone that much better. Jamaal Williams, again, the amount of touches he's getting, the amount of work he's seeing in this backfield is a relevant amount to where he needs to be picked up in your league, and he can't be on the waiver wires any longer. I believe this guy, yes, he might be splitting snap to Aaron Jones. He probably is behind Aaron Jones in the pecking order, but I still think he has value, especially in good matchups coming forth. All right, moving on to number 4, Ty Johnson. Now, for those of you who aren't aware, Kerryon Johnson did have an injury that he sustained Sunday. Now, I didn't mention it earlier in the news section because I don't know to what extent Kerryon Johnson is injured. Now, we do know that he left the game. He came back with a knee brace on the sideline. Now, that is not a good sign. That is not a good sign at all. Now, I don't know to what extent he is injured or if he's going to miss any time, but if in fact he is going to, Ty Johnson playing against the New York Giants this week. We just saw Chase Edmonds rip off for one of the most incredible performances we've seen in a while from a running back out of nowhere. Why not Ty Johnson? That's all I have to say. I think Ty Johnson going forward, yes, he's going to be splitting some of his snaps with J.D. McKissic, who is going to be the third down back. But we also saw Ty Johnson catch 4 passes out of this backfield on Sunday. So still, a guy like this coming into this organization, yes, he might be a rookie, less experienced, but if Kerryon Johnson is going to be missing time, I believe Ty Johnson is going to have relevant value and is a guy that we should be picking up, especially for those of you who are Kerryon Johnson owners or for those of you who are in need of running back depth as the bye weeks are upon us. This coming week, bye weeks are for the Ravens and the Cowboys, if I'm not mistaken. So go ahead, anticipate that, and pick up a guy like Ty Johnson, potentially because of the injury that was sustained by Kerryon. We'll get a little bit more information in the coming days as to what the injury is like and if he's going to miss time, but this is kind of an insurance policy pickup. All right, moving on to number 5, Kareem Hunt. Like I mentioned before, he's eligible to play in Week 10. The biggest question is whether or not Kareem Hunt is going to come in and have instant workload and actually get a little bit of relevancy out of this backfield in terms of fantasy. We could see a two-headed monster. We see it throughout many teams. Again, the Packers. Sometimes, mainly, we see a little bit of the two-headed monster in New Orleans. We've seen it in a couple different places. Potentially, Chase Edmonds and David Johnson could end up being a two-headed monster. But as of right now, and we also see it with the Steelers, whether it's James Conner and Jalen Samuels or James Conner and Benny Snell Jr. We see a lot of two-headed monsters in the National Football League because a lot of teams don't want to rely upon one running back to have to carry all of the potential rushing attempts and break down their body. So potentially going through this season, I could see Kareem Hunt get a little bit of work. He could be a flex option going forward if this offense wants to open things up. We know Kareem Hunt is a better receiving back than Nick Chubb going forward, but the question is whether or not Kareem Hunt is going to be utilized to an extent to where he can have some fantasy value. I think there's a chance. Therefore, you can go and pick him up. You're going to have to wait on him for 2 weeks, but I think this is the week you pick him up if, in fact, you want to invest in his value if you're excited about the prospect. All right, moving on to number 6, Benny Snell Jr. Like I mentioned, a two-headed monster. This coming week, yes, Jalen Samuels is going to be out for another week because of that knee scope that he had a couple weeks back. So he's probably not going to return this week, but who is going to return is the relevancy of this backfield. James Conner, Benny Snell, they're going to be playing against the Miami Dolphins defense, even though we saw nothing relevant out of Frank Gore and Devin Singletary in the easiest matchup they've had all season long. They didn't do anything, but I do expect this Pittsburgh offensive line to take care of the Dolphins on Monday night. It should be an easy one-sided affair between the bunch. It should be Benny Snell and James Conner running all over this defense. And if you are in need of a running back, I think this is a guy who's a 1-week pickup in play, potentially in a deeper league. Moving on to number 7, Mark Walton. We talked about Mark Walton last week as well as Benny Snell. But Mark Walton, we talked about him to an extent to where yes, there might be Kalen Balazs stealing touchdowns on the goal line every single week. There might be Kenyon Drake running around, getting a couple touches here and there, working the passing game. But Mark Walton saw a good amount of work this past Sunday against the Buffalo Bills in the running game. Double-digit rushing attempts, had a decent amount of yards, and got majority of the snaps out of that backfield. So the way I'm looking at it, they probably are going to use Mark Walton going forward. I'm assuming Kenyon Drake's name has been floating around in that trade talks for the last couple of weeks. There is a chance that a guy like Kenyon Drake could be moved this, before the trade deadline hits. And potentially give him extra value. So if he's available, that is also a good suggestion. But Mark Walton will be the number 1 of this team going forward if, in fact, that trade is to take place. To be honest, this team looks like they want to win. Ryan Fitzpatrick's out there putting up some pretty good numbers, and they could honestly, mess around and win a game here, and Mark Walton could have decent fantasy performances. All right, moving on to the last 2 I wanted to mention. It is Spencer Ware and Ajayi. Again, one of the 2 are going to be signed to the Arizona Cardinals. If, in fact, you want to, let's say, for example, David Johnson, they come out and they say David Johnson is going to be out for 4 to 5 weeks. This back injury is bad enough, and we don't want to take a risk for the future of this player, considering he's going to be with us for X amount of years. We're going to take it safe. You probably want to pick up a guy like Spencer Ware if, in fact, he is signed, because it's going to give him inherent value immediately. Yes, Chase Edmonds is a good running back. Yes, he touched the ball 27 times, but Chase Edmonds, 27 times a game for the next 5 weeks he's going to break down. There's no way that's possible. So they're going to split snaps with another running back. They've got to bring somebody else in to be that counterbalance to him. So one of these two is going to get the job. Whether or not it's Spencer Ware or Ajayi, I don't know. But I just wanted to go ahead and bring that to your guys' attention as a running back pickup that you could potentially be, picking up, and if you're interested in investing in it potentially. So those are the top 8 running back waiver wire pickups. There are other guys that I'm sure that are available in your league, but typically I'm assuming that a lot of the guys that I would typically mention aren't available. But there are also other guys that are 1 to 2% owned. If I didn't think they were relevant to mention here, then obviously I didn't. But either way, let's go ahead and talk about the wide receiver position going into week 8 of the fantasy football season. All right, so starting off at the top, I scored 4 receiving touchdowns this past Sunday for the Detroit Lions. Somebody tell me, I think it's incredible. Marvin Jones and Kenny Golladay. You cannot have a Marvin Jones and Kenny Golladay game in which both of them are great. You can't do it. It hasn't happened this season. It's one or the other. And unfortunately, this week for Kenny Golladay owners, it was Marvin Jones. Pretty funny thing. I had a team this past weekend with Aaron Rodgers and Marvin Jones on it. So you can imagine how excited I was. 6-point per passing touchdown league. I had 10 total touchdowns with 2 different players. That was fun. But either way, Marvin Jones Jr., he had an incredible amount of targets. Not only did he get a lot of the work through the year, he was being covered by Xavier Rhodes, who I talk about a lot being one of the better cornerbacks in the National Football League. You could see Xavier Rhodes' frustration on a consistent basis because Marvin Jones was beating him every single snap and dominating him in the goal line, red zone opportunities. It was absolutely insane. Now, sure, Marvin Jones got a lot of targets, got a lot of work, had 4 touchdowns to make his week. And so did Danny Amendola, had a huge amount of targets, had a lot of work out of this offense. But Marvin Jones, of the two, he is the number 2 wide receiver of this team. He is going to be behind Kenny Golladay, even though Kenny Golladay didn't get much work this past weekend. It's one or the other. But going forward, if he's available, which I doubt he is because he's typically a guy that it should be on roster, if he's available, go ahead and pick him up because there's a potential that going forward, they could continue to pass the ball with Kerryon Johnson out. This offense could go to a lot of heavy passing offense. I mean, we've seen the Lions in the past only pass the ball. We've seen that in the past, and that's not a surprise. So going forward, without the running back of their future in the backfield, there's a potential that they could just go back to doing a lot of shootouts, considering how bad their defense has been playing as of late. All right, moving on to number 2, Corey Davis. Prior to this weekend beginning, I picked up Corey Davis in a couple of my leagues, and I was like, maybe we try this. Maybe we test this out. Maybe we see if Corey Davis, who was pretty good last season in terms of value, his target counts were really high and his reception counts not great. He had like a 60-some-odd percent, 50-some-odd percent catch rate last season. Wasn't fantastic. But again, he was dealing with Blaine Gabbert and the combination of Blaine Gabbert and Marcus Mariota with a busted elbow. So still, last season was decent. Came into this year, no utilization. But now Ryan Tannehill's there, and Ryan Tannehill's bringing in something that we haven't seen yet. We've seen an offense for the Tennessee Titans revitalized for the first time in God knows how many weeks, 5-6 weeks here. Really, we haven't seen, anything close to this since week 1. Week 1 was the best that the Titans looked offensively, and now that we've finally gotten back to a quarterback who can at least throw into tight windows and can make plays, Corey Davis is becoming more and more of a relevant potential play as the weeks go forth. I think this is a guy that should probably be available in your waivers because he hasn't done anything all year, and this is a guy that could potentially, as the number 1 wide receiver of his respective team, be a pretty decent play going forward, especially as the bipocalypses are on the way coming in our direction. So Corey Davis, not a bad pickup. Moving on to number 3, Kenny Stills and Keke Coutee. Again, like I mentioned, Will Fuller's going to be out. One of these two guys, I think from what we saw yesterday, Kenny Stills is going to fill into Will Fuller's position. He's going to be the deep threat. Now, Keke Coutee then will get more time on the field. He will play the slot. These 3 guys, Hopkins, Stills, Coutee, will be relevant fantasy options going forward. Obviously, Hopkins is the default number 1. That is a certainty. But between the 2 of Stills and Coutee, I think both of them have a very good opportunity to have value, and I think they're going to. There's going to be a lot of shootouts coming in the directions of the Houston Texans. That's how they play their games. A lot of higher scoring affairs. And as of right now, I like both of them as pickups going forward as potential, higher scoring matchup wide receivers in a pretty good offense. All right, moving on to number 4, Zach Pascal. Another one of these guys that had an incredible week. We knew that Zach Pascal was good, especially in those weeks where T.Y. Hilton missed time due to the hamstring injury. Zach Pascal got a lot of work in the passing game. He was the number one at that time when T.Y. Hilton was out. Now, T.Y. Hilton's back. They're coming off a bye week. Everyone's healthy, and they're throwing the ball a lot. Not only did they beat the Houston Texans and the Kansas City Chiefs in the last 2 games that the Colts have played, they're passing the ball a lot, and Jacoby Brissett is playing incredibly. Yes, they're not running the ball consistently, but they're feeding their top prospects. They're feeding T.Y. Hilton, they're feeding Eric Ebron, and then now Zach Pascal with 2 touchdowns this past week, getting more implementation in the offense. This was a guy that was primarily used as a blocking receiver, is now turned into a vital offensive threat for this team, and a guy that going forward, because of how many shootouts this Colts offense is going to have to face in the coming weeks because of just said matchups, I think this is a guy that could be relevant going forward. So I wanted to suggest him. That's Zach Pascal, number 4. Moving on to number 5, Jamison Crowder. He hasn't played on Monday night yet. This is recorded way before the Monday night game on Monday, but in the morning. I want to talk about Jamison Crowder specifically because I do think he is still not owned in enough leagues, and we'll see it by tonight. We'll see the amount of targets he gets, the amount of work he gets, and that he's going to be the only receiver on that offense that's probably getting a streamlined relevancy, especially against a tough defense. So as of right now, Jamison Crowder, again, a guy that I think he's not owned in enough leagues, and I think he should be respected more and picked up because he's going to have value. Yes, you might not be able to cash in on a Robbie Anderson this coming week, but Jamison Crowder was a good option, and going forward, I think he's going to continue to be a good option for this offense. Going on to number 6, A.J. Brown. So on the other side of that Corey Davis, we have A.J. Brown, the rookie wide receiver out of Ole Miss. So as of right now, it's between him and Adam Humphries. Now, the only reason I didn't put Humphries up here is because I think the offense is not built around feeding the slot position. I don't know why they even went and got Adam Humphries. They didn't really change his offense much, right? They still heavily ran the ball with Derrick Henry, which they were supposed to because the Chargers are terrible at stopping the run. And then they went ahead, they fed the tight end position, fed their bigger, wide receivers, Corey Davis, A.J. Brown, bigger stature guys. And then we had a little bit of sprinkling of Adam Humphries in the middle. But I still think A.J. Brown, another one of these guys, only owned in about 10% of leagues, has value going forward. We've seen him have value in the past with Marcus Mariota. And as long as he continues to get targets in his direction as the number 2 of this team, we could see some more relevancy in his direction. Moving on to number 7. All right. So like I mentioned a little bit before, Adam Thielen probably going to miss this week. Now, they play against the Washington Redskins. The Washington Redskins have given up 10-plus touchdowns to opposing wide receivers. Josh Norman missed this past week and could potentially miss this Thursday considering it is a short week coming up. So it will be the Vikings versus the Washington Redskins. What does that mean? I think, Dalvin Cook's going to run all over him. Stephon Diggs is going to find relevancy, but there's also a possibility that a couple other wide receivers potentially could contribute. We saw a little bit of Irv Smith and Kyle Rudolph, but is there a possibility that Johnson over here, Olabisi Johnson, about that name, look at that, Olabisi Johnson, that's it. I don't know, man. This is an interesting name to say the least. Olabisi sounds like a last name though, but either way, there's a potential that he could have some relevancy. He did get some work this past week. That kind of gives me confidence as soon as Adam Thielen was out, so he has experience. Rookie out of Colorado State. This is a guy that could potentially be the number 3 wide receiver of this team, and this coming week could step up into a pretty good role. This is for only deep leagues if you're really desperate at the wide receiver position. All right, moving on to my last wide receiver waiver wire target that you could potentially be picking up for this week, Alex Erickson. Now, okay, suggesting Alex Erickson is a little bit tricky considering the offense that he's involved in, right? You already have Tyler Boyd. You already have Auden Tate. You already have A.J. Green eventually coming back. Alex Erickson somehow managed to have 14 targets and a ridiculous amount of receptions and a lot of work this past week against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, the question is Alex Erickson going to consistently see this work? I don't know. A lot of the time, I think the Bengals are going to be coming back in games and throwing heavily. I mean, we saw Tyler Boyd have 14 targets, but only catch the ball 5 times and fumble once. So potentially Alex Erickson could continue to see work. If they're going out in 3 wide receiver sets and spreading the ball heavily, there could be a relevancy for this wide receiver position here. And if A.J. Green's not coming back soon, Alex Erickson could find value. Anyway, let's move on. Let's talk about tight ends going into week 8. All right, so the tight end position, again, it's tricky because what did we see this past week? We saw Patrick Mahomes go down, therefore Travis Kelce disappeared. Evan Ingram, in the easiest matchup at the tight end position against the Arizona Cardinals, did nothing, but his backup, Rhett Ellison, got the touchdown. That is extremely unfortunate. Then we saw Zach Ertz, bada boom, garbage. Dallas Goedert's over here catching touchdown. Who else is George Kittle, 5-point game. We saw the top echelon of tight ends. I mean, even, Mark Andrews dropped a touchdown. There were a lot of just plays. And then what did we see? I literally called it. I had Darren Waller at like 8 or 7 or 8, and I said, Darren Waller hasn't scored a touchdown yet. And if and when he does, then he can get a little bit higher in these rankings. And I was like, you know what? Just watch. He's going to catch a touchdown. In fact, he caught 3 touchdowns this past week. One was called back for a holding call. The dude had a 28-point performance in half PPR scoring formats. What an incredible monster week for the guy who just got paid. It's absolutely incredible. Now, going forward, there are still other guys that are not owned in leagues that I really do believe need to be. Eric Ebron being number 1. I know Ebron, comparatively to last year, is a little bit underwhelming, but he's going to see more and more work. Thus far this season hasn't been great, but he is going to get better. Over time, there's going to be a lot of shootouts. He is more of a receiver for this team than he is a tight end. A lot of the blocking is done by Jack Doyle. A lot of the routes in the running formations are ran by Jack Doyle. But when they want to pass the ball heavily, Eric Ebron's coming in making monster plays. Moving on to number 2, Jimmy Graham. Jimmy Graham, I think by Sunday morning, I adjusted him for my number 8 tight end, considering there wasn't going to be, the way I saw it was, okay, if Devontae Adams is out, there aren't too many options here. Who is going to get majority of the red zone work? A lot of it has gone to Jimmy Graham thus far this season since about week 4. So from then on, I thought, okay, if Jimmy Graham continues to see the work in the red zone, he's eventually going to have value. If you're playing against a defense that isn't great against wide receivers, pretty much Jimmy Graham is a big wide receiver running around in the back of the end zone. Should be fine. Found himself a touchdown. That's great. Going forward, if he continues to see targets, touchdowns are really, really valuable for a guy like this. Outside of getting a touchdown, if you don't catch that touchdown, you're having about an 8-point game. That's not terrible, but it has to be in a good matchup going forward. In this offense, they're clicking on all cylinders, and they're firing on all cylinders. So as of right now, not a bad option. Jimmy Graham. Moving on, Gerald Everett. If he hasn't been picked up yet, or if he somehow got dropped last week, again, he needs to be picked up. This is a guy that has got one of the easiest strength of schedules going forward in an offense that continues to get better as the weeks progress, in an offense that scores a lot, whether or not they're in good matchups. Sure, the 49ers really did clamp them down, but this past week had an extremely favorable matchup against the Falcons. This coming week, you get the Bengals. Again, this is another good pickup going forward. Jonnu Smith, my number 4 option for the Tennessee Titans. Again, Delaney Walker did exit with an ankle injury. I'm not sure to what extent he's going to be missing time, if he does. Jonnu Smith, we saw him pretty much play the entirety of last season in the absence of Delaney Walker. So a guy like this, who has already experience under his belt, is going to be utilized in this offense that loves to use the tight end position so heavily because they want to run the ball. And a guy like Jonnu Smith, even though he is not a great run blocker, does get a lot of work in the passing game and has the ability to do so. A guy that is kind of new to the position, still beginning to learn every single game. Has looked good in the past, so he could have some relevancy going forward. Number 5 it's a mix between Jared Cook and Josh Hill, the 2 tight ends for the New Orleans Saints. Now the question is Jared Cook going to be healthy this week? Because they play against the Cardinals, and the Cardinals, as we know, are not good against the tight end position. I do believe whether or not Jared Cook plays, Josh Hill could have some value. He even scored a touchdown this past week. That's 3 weeks in a row where the tight end position for the New Orleans Saints has scored a touchdown. That's exactly what we want to see, and hopefully Jared Cook could be healthy this week so that he can have that value and play a monster role against the Cardinals. Moving on to number 6, Chris Herndon. Yes, again, the Jets have not played yet against the New England Patriots on Monday night, but what I do anticipate seeing is a good performance out of Chris Herndon in the coming weeks as the matchups progressively get easier. He is going to be more and more involved. As of right now, I think he is doubtful with that hamstring injury, but hopefully over time we could see a little bit more usage of him in the coming weeks. So if you want to go ahead and stash a guy like this, you absolutely could. We talked about him weeks prior, but again, just wanted to mention him. All right, moving on to the quarterback position for Week 8, the targets. Again, number 1's obviously going to be Christian Kirk. Kirk Cousins. It's going to be Kirk Cousins because they play against the Washington Redskins on Thursday night. Yes, it's a short week, but they're gonna throw the ball as much as they can. Stephon Diggs is gonna be fine. Kirk Cousins has been incredible in the last 3 weeks, and he continues to only get better. Finally, he's back on track. Finally, they've kind of let him free. He's gained the confidence, and he's really gotten back to that you like that kind of play. And he gets to play against his former team. That only helps. So Kirk Cousins is my number 1 quarterback target of the week. Moving on to number 2, Matthew Stafford, in an offense that continues to play well. Matthew Stafford, they're going to keep throwing the ball. They're going to continue to throw the ball, and that's the only way they're going to have to win. Matthew Stafford has to carry this team, and he has to outscore defenses or outscore opposing teams in order to make sure that his defense, can't throw the game away, which they have in the last couple of weeks. So as of right now, I do believe Matthew Stafford a pretty good option going forward. Jacoby Brissett, another one of these great players that I've been mentioning for the last couple of weeks, especially Stafford and Brissett. I've mentioned them since like week 2 as guys that always should be rostered. These guys are having incredible performances. I know that these guys have already passed their bye weeks. Going forward, you don't have to worry about having to drop one of these guys. If you pick them up, they have pretty good matchups going forward to where you can have some confidence in them and play them in almost every single one of their games. So I don't mind Jacoby Brissett going forward either. Teddy Bridgewater putting together some incredible performances. As an offense, this team is really clicking with Bridgewater. When Breeze comes back, they're only going to get better. But this week they get to play against the Cardinals. Cardinals are not a great defense. And I do believe that Teddy Bridgewater will be taking advantage of said matchup and could have himself a good game. Moving on to number 5, Ryan Tannehill. Just have to mention it just in case. For those of you who are in a deeper league, perhaps you play in a 10-team league with 2 quarterback starts. Ryan Tannehill should have already been picked up because of the availability of a new quarterback. But again, this is a guy that had a pretty good week, 2 touchdowns, only 1 interception, continues to gain confidence. When he was a Miami Dolphin, he really wasn't that bad. If you guys go back and look at his statistics from last season, what he was capable of doing. In fact, you know what? I'm going to do that right now just so I can prove to you guys that Ryan Tannehill is not a terrible quarterback. He was really good prior to his injury last season with the Dolphins, despite the Adam Gase offense and how they were really not moving the ball well. To start the season, let's be honest, from weeks 1 through, what is this? He was pretty good. 2 touchdowns, 3 touchdowns. Then you get a 0-1, 2 touchdowns, 3 touchdowns, 3 touchdowns. Like, that is pretty good performances. Comparatively to Marcus Mariota, the stat that I read was like Marcus Mariota has only thrown 300 yards in a game like 4 times in his 5 years of his career. Ryan Tannehill did it in the first game with the Tennessee Titans as a starting quarterback. Like, that in itself, Mariota's done. That's all I got to say. Moving on to number 6, Mason Rudolph. Again, the Steelers play against the Dolphins this week. Could have immense value going forward. Hopefully, Juju Smith can rise from the ashes after that bye week and potentially have value going forth with a guy like Mason Rudolph. Let's go ahead and talk about the defensive waiver wire pickups before we leave on today's episode. Starting off with number 1, like I just mentioned, Pittsburgh plays the Dolphins. That's absolutely relevant and is going to present value for said defense. So if they are available, we talked about it a little bit last week, but if they are available, go ahead and pick them up and play them this week against the Dolphins on Monday Night Football. Moving on to the Green Bay Packers. They get to play against the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, Matt Moore is going to be the quarterback of that team. Is Matt Moore going to have value in fantasy? It's only going to, it's going to be sketchy because Matt Moore, prior to going into the game on Thursday Night Football, am I ready for this? He had practiced 0 times. He took 0 snaps at the quarterback position prior to going in. Every offensive snap during practice went to Patrick Mahomes. Matt Moore had not played football in 2018. This was the first snaps that he's seen in a very long time, and I think a Green Bay defense could force some trouble for this offense, and Green Bay Packers, they're just an option. Moving on, 49ers. I don't think the 49ers are available. There's no way they are, but if they are, not a bad option. Pass rush could get after this offensive line, really cause some trouble for Josh Allen, a guy that likes to fumble a lot. If Joey Bosa's getting after him, he could see some value there. Moving on, the Carolina Panthers on the other side of that matchup. Again, you have to remember the right and left tackle for this 49ers offense is out with injury, if in fact somehow the Panthers take an early lead and have to force Jimmy Garoppolo to throw the ball, this Carolina Panthers defense has been good in pass rush situations and being able to pressure quarterbacks, force mistakes, cause a lot of turnovers that the secondary has been able to pick up. So the Carolina Panthers defense, like we all have seen for the last 3 weeks, on another level, could potentially have another good week. Number 5, the New Orleans Saints. Like I've mentioned in the past, this defense is on another level. Sure, they let a lot of touchdowns go through during garbage time last week, or yesterday, against the Bears, but they get to play against a rookie quarterback, Kyler Murray, potentially no David Johnson. They're going to be able to stop the run. They're going to be able to stop everything that this guy wants to do. They're going to send a lot of pressure in his direction, and I think the New Orleans Saints, another great week for them. And I spelled New Orleans wrong. I put an extra E in there. That's what happens when you have fat fingers. You just bloop, slip. All right, moving on to the Buffalo Bills is my number 6. The Philadelphia Eagles did not look good last night. As an entire whole, they just double-teamed Alshon Jeffrey. They made Zach Ertz irrelevant, and they stopped the run. And what happened? Completely shut down this offense. Carson Wentz didn't look good. They turned over the ball far too many times. And if the Buffalo Bills can string something together and put together a good performance, because we know that this defense can be great, then they themselves can be good against this this Philadelphia Eagles offense, and the Buffalo Bills could have a good defensive week. All right. So those are my waiver wire targets for week 8 of the fantasy football season. I want to thank everybody for watching. If you haven't yet already, subscribe to the channel, click the like button, and make sure to click the bell notification button to stay up to date and be notified when my latest content is out. Thank you again. Tomorrow we will be talking about the running back starter sits, my top 36 rankings, all of that jazz. Hopefully we get a little bit more information regarding a couple of these injured players prior to that, but then again, hopefully this kind of helps you establish a plan for waiver wires this coming week. Thank you everybody for watching, and until next time, which will be tomorrow, I appreciate it again, and I will see you guys. Peace.